The first time I saw a stranger's SUV cruising across my lawn like it was some kind of public road, I thought I was hallucinating, but when a second one followed honking at the first to speed up, I realized something far worse. My private property had somehow turned into a neighborhood shortcut and no one had even asked. It felt like waking up to find your backyard turned into an exit ramp. At first I genuinely thought maybe I was misunderstanding something, had only lived there for a few months and was still learning the quirks of the land. I had bought the house because it sat just outside an neighborhood on its own secluded plot of land. That detail mattered to me. I wanted privacy, freedom, and no nitpicking rule enforcers deciding what shade of beige my garage should be. It was peaceful until the tire marks started appearing. There was a narrow stretch of dirt and gravel on the far end of my lot that bordered the HOA community. It wasn't paved, no signs, no lights, just a line of trampled weeds. When I first noticed it, I assumed it was an old utility access route or maybe something the previous owner used occasionally, but then more cars started using it, and not just the occasional lost driver. It became a whole parade. Mornings, evenings, sometimes even in the dead of night, headlights would sweep across my property like a low-budget drive-in theater. At first I stood by my porch just watching, confused. Some drivers even waved like I was a traffic cop stationed to bless their passage. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was temporary, maybe a GPS glitch was directing people here, but I quickly learned this was no accident. They were choosing to use my land. The situation escalated quickly. One evening I came home from work to find a car stuck in the mud near the side yard, its wheels spinning and flinging dirt like it was trying to win a monster truck rally. The driver had the nerve to shout, "You should really get this part paved, man, it's super bumpy." That was the moment I knew I was in for a wild ride. I started asking around. Turns out people in the HOA neighborhood believed this dirt path was a communal access route, even though it was clearly fenced on both ends and marked on the property map as mine. One neighbor told me, "Oh yeah, everyone's been using that road for years, way faster than going around," as if convenience trumped ownership. It wasn't just about trespassing anymore, it was about entitlement. To test the waters, I put up a simple sign: private property, no through traffic. It was gone the next day, not knocked down, gone like it vanished into a black hole of denial. I tried placing cones along the path, they disappeared too. At one point someone even moved them aside and arranged them in a smiley face like mocking the very idea of boundaries. The final straw came on a Saturday morning. I had barely stepped outside with my coffee when I saw a luxury sedan drift wide across the path and chew through part of my lawn. Deep ruts carved into the grass. I had just seated the driver, an older woman in tennis gear, didn't even stop, just zipped right through, leaving muddy tire trails like a personal signature. That afternoon I drove down to City Hall and pulled every document I could about my property lines. I met with a local contractor. I measured, ream measured, and double-checked every inch. The verdict was crystal clear: that strip belonged to me, not public land, not shared land, not easement land, just mine. I wasted no time. I scheduled the installation of a proper metal gate with a keypad lock. Nothing dramatic, just something functional to send the message that this was no longer a free-for-all. I even added reflective tape and a bright red sign saying, "Do not enter private property." The gate went up on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning the neighborhood lost its collective mind. I returned from a quick grocery run to find a sleek black SUV idling at the gate. The driver was leaning on the horn like she was trying to summon the devil himself. I parked and approached. That's when I met her, Karen Hidston, in all her HOA glory, sunglasses on, arms crossed, posture straight like she ran the entire zip code. The second she saw me she stormed over and jabbed a finger toward the gate. "You need to take this down right now," she snapped. "You're blocking the neighborhood access road. This is illegal." I blinked, caught between disbelief and amusement. "This is my land," I said calmly. "It's not a public road." "Wrong answer." Karen's face twisted like I had insulted her bloodline. "I'm on the HOA board," she hissed. "We've used this road for years. You can't just block it." I could practically feel the wave of entitlement radiating off her like a heat lamp. I repeated even slower this time, "This isn't a community road, it's private property, always has been." She scoffed. "Oh, we'll see about that," she muttered, whipping out her phone, and just like that she dialed 911. That's when I realized this situation had gone full sitcom. This woman was seriously calling the cops on me for locking a gate on my own land. When the police arrived they were as puzzled as I was. One officer talked to Karen, another asked me what was going on. I showed him the paperwork, maps, pictures, even the deed. He gave a long whistle and said, "Well yeah, that's pretty solid, this is yours." Meanwhile Karen was arguing that her rights as a board member gave her authority over neighborhood infrastructure. The officer nodded slowly, then turned to her and said, Ma'am, this isn't your neighborhood's infrastructure, it's his lawn that didn't go over well. Karen's face turned red, her voice climbing in pitch as she ranted about decades of tradition, community needs, and how I was breaking the neighborhood's spirit. I just stood there, arms folded, as the officer gently explained private property law to a woman who apparently thought HOA board membership came with divine powers. Eventually Karen left in a huff, tires squealing as she peeled away, but as I walked back toward the gate I had a strange feeling in my gut. This wasn't over. People like Karen don't accept defeat, they plan comebacks. I could almost see it in her eyes as she drove off. The fuse had been lit and something told me the real firestorm was only just beginning. The next morning I thought the worst was behind me. The gate was locked, the signs were posted, and I had paperwork backing every inch of my decision. But as I stood sipping coffee on the porch, the calm didn't last long. A strange sight greeted me at the end of my driveway. A group of neighbors gathered around the gate like tourists examining a wild animal enclosure. One of them, a tall guy in gym clothes, snapped a picture of the no trespassing sign. Another muttered loud enough for me to hear, "So this is the guy who thinks he owns the street now." I didn't say anything. I figured they'd get bored and move on, but within the hour someone stuffed a crudely folded flyer into my mailbox. It was a printed sheet of paper with a blurry photo of my face taken from a still frame of my own porch camera. The headline screamed in all caps, "Illegal gate blocks community access." And that was just the beginning. The flyer wasn't just in my mailbox, it was everywhere, taped to stop signs wedged into mailboxes, even pinned to one of my trees with a rusty thumbtack. The headline blared in Comic Sans, "Stop the gate bully, contact the wall." It was absurd, but what struck me most wasn't the message, it was how fast Karen Hson had mobilized. By noon she turned a personal grievance into a neighborhood campaign. I decided to ignore it, let them waste their ink and paper, but curiosity got the better of me, so I checked the camera footage from the night before. There she was, Karen herself, marching up and down the path at dusk, pausing every few feet to slap up a new flyer. At one point she even stopped to take a selfie in front of the gate, arms crossed with a grim expression like she was starring in a documentary about injustice. It was hard not to laugh. Theatrics aside, the dedication was impressive. The next day got even weirder. A delivery driver showed up looking completely lost. He asked how to get through to Oakage Court. I had to explain politely that there was no through road here. He sighed, reversed his truck across my lawn, and left behind a fresh set of muddy grooves. As he backed out I was beginning to feel like a toll booth operator, with no booth, no toll, and no authority, just strangers acting like I was the problem for trying to defend what was legally mine. The wall itself remained publicly silent, but the neighborhood wasn't. Little signs of retaliation started appearing. One morning I found my mailbox dented inward like someone had taken a swing with a baseball bat. Another time someone tossed a greasy bag of fast food trash over the fence into my side yard. Then there was the sidewalk chalk, bright pink letters at the end of my driveway that read "Greedy." This wasn't just Karen anymore, she'd rallied the whole street against me. Then it escalated again. I came home late one evening and saw flashing police lights at the gate. My stomach dropped. For a moment I thought someone had tried to break in, but no, there she was again, Karen Hiddleston, standing in full righteous fury, arguing with an officer. Her hands waved like she was directing air traffic. Her voice pierced the air, "He's blocking access. This used to be open. Our community needs this road." The officer looked tired, maybe amused, like he'd seen this kind of suburban WA drama before. I parked and walked over. The officer turned to me. "You the property owner?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Here's my paperwork." I handed him the same folder I'd shown the last officer's deed survey, zoning information. He flipped through it, nodded, and said, "This all checks out." Karen jumped back in immediately. "You can't just shut off a road like this. People depend on it. This is part of our community flow." I replied, "It's not a road, it's private land. It always has been." The officer looked at her. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but this is clearly private property. He has the legal right to restrict access." Karen's face twisted. "But it's been used for years. Doesn't that make it public by default?" The officer blinked. "No ma'am, that's not how it works, not unless there's a legal easement, and there isn't one on record." She looked like someone had told her gravity was optional. "This is going to destroy our neighborhood traffic system," she snapped. "I'm calling the WA president." The officer thanked me for cooperating and advised me to report any further harassment. He left. Karen didn't. She stayed by the gate for 10 full minutes, pacing and muttering into her phone like a villain in a low-budget political thriller. Eventually she stormed off, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about the shortcut anymore. This was about control. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No more flyers, no angry foot traffic, no trash over the fence, and that made me nervous. People like Karen don't vanish, they regroup. Sure enough, by the weekend I got a certified letter in the mail, this time from the WA itself it was polite but pointed. A special meeting had been scheduled to discuss a concern regarding community access impacted by a physical obstruction. In other words, the gate. I wasn't even part of the HOA yet they were dragging me into a meeting like I was some rogue tenant refusing to follow the rules of the kingdom. I called my friend Brian, a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes. I told him the whole story. He laughed. These people always think they have more power than they do, he said. Let them bluff. We'll bring facts. We prepped for the meeting. I printed out fresh copies of every relevant document. I even edited together a short video compilation of my camera footage, cars tearing through my yard, Karen posting flyers, her gate selfie, and more. If they were putting on a show, I was bringing receipts. The night before the meeting I got one last reminder of what I was dealing with. I found a fresh set of tire tracks across the edge of my lawn and a laminated note pinned to the tree. It read in bold Arial font, "This path belongs to the people." No signature, just passive-aggressive entitlement. I took photos and added them to my evidence pile. I spent that night rehearsing, not because I was nervous but because I wanted to be absolutely clear. No shouting, no dramatics, just truth, confidence, and law. I glanced at the camera feed one last time. Karen drove by, slowly glaring at the gate like it had personally offended her family name. I nodded at the lens. We were in this together. The line was drawn. Tomorrow I'd find out how far they were willing to cross it. The board president turned toward me and gestured politely. "Mr. Callahan, would you care to explain your actions?" I nodded, stood up, and opened my folder. "Sure thing," I said, trying to sound cooperative but firm. "This land is mine. It's legally mine. It's marked as private property on township maps. It's registered as part of my parcel, and there's no easement or agreement granting anyone else access through it. I've had issues with trespassing, property damage, and safety concerns, so I put up a gate to protect my land. That's it." Before the board could respond, Karen Hiddleston leaned forward and launched her attack. "That's not the full story," she said, her tone polished but aggressive. "This path has been used for decades. It's the most convenient access point for dozens of families. You moved in recently and decided to change something that affects everyone. We're not trying to invade your home, but this is a disruption to the entire neighborhood." I calmly pulled out the township's property map and held it up. "Used or not, it's still private land. There's no legal precedent that allows community usage to override ownership unless an easement was officially recorded, and it wasn't." Karen rolled her eyes and replied, "Just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. That shortcut is part of our lives. You're treating your neighbors like enemies." Brian stood up and cleared his throat, his voice sharp and deliberate with respect. "That's exactly what the paper means. Property laws are not suggestions. You don't get to rewrite ownership because it's more convenient for a few drivers to cut across someone's yard." There was an awkward silence. One of the other board members, a younger woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, raised her hand gently. "Do we have any actual documents from the HOA that show this path as a sanctioned access point?" Karen quickly turned toward her. "No, but we've always acknowledged it. It's just something we've all known." The woman gave a slow, skeptical nod. Another board member asked, "Has the HOA ever maintained this road, paid for gravel, signage, anything?" Karen paused, then shook her head. "No, because it was always just there." The conversation began to shift. The more Karen insisted that long-term use gave her the right to dictate what I did with my land, the more the board seemed uncomfortable. I could sense the change in the room. The certainty Karen had when I walked in was fading fast. The board president glanced at my documents, then looked toward Karen. "Miss Hiddleston, while we understand the importance of tradition and convenience, we also have to acknowledge legal boundaries. If the property is indeed private, we don't have authority to regulate it." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "So what, we just let him cut us off? That's the message we're sending?" I responded before anyone else could know. "The message is that people should respect property lines and ask permission before using someone else's land. I'm not doing this to spite anyone. I'm doing it because I shouldn't have to repair ruts in my yard every week or call the cops because someone thinks they can use my backyard as a road." Brian chimed in again, this time with a slight smirk. "If your board wants to pursue legal action, that's your right, but I'd advise checking with a real estate attorney before wasting anyone's time." Karen suddenly stood up and slammed her hands on the table. "This isn't over. You're causing division in this community. You've made things worse for everyone, and I won't let this slide. I'm escalating this higher up, county, state, whatever it takes." Her voice cracked slightly, not from sadness but frustration. She had come here expecting a victory lap and was now losing control of the room. The board president raised his hand. "Mrs. Hiddleston, please, that's enough. We've heard both sides. At this point we're not in a position to pursue action against Mr. Callahan." There was a murmur of agreement from the other board members. Karen's face fell. The anger didn't leave, it just simmered beneath the surface, bottled up for another day. She didn't even look at me as she gathered her papers and stormed out of the room. The meeting adjourned shortly after. A few board members even apologized to me for the inconvenience. One of them approached me privately and said we were misled. I think she let personal feelings cloud the facts. As Brian and I walked to the car, he chuckled and shook his head. She really thought WA power extended beyond the neighborhood lines. That's adorable. I felt a small wave of relief, but I wasn't stupid. Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted loss gracefully. She'd be back, and next time she'd probably be armed with something more than laminated flyers. But for now I had one, not just because the board backed down, but because I stood my ground with facts, not fury. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I saw a couple of neighbors whispering by the entrance, watching me with new eyes. I didn't know if they were on Karen's side or mine, but one thing was clear: the war wasn't over. It had only paused, and Karen, she wasn't going to stay quiet for long. It had only been a week since the WA meeting, but the silence that followed didn't sit right with me. Karen hadn't made another appearance. No more flyers had been posted, and the usual parade of shortcut drivers had vanished like roaches when the lights come on. On the surface everything looked calm, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person to walk away quietly after getting publicly shut down. Something was coming. I just didn't know when or how loud it would be. That answer came in the form of an envelope slid halfway into my mailbox one rainy afternoon. It wasn't from the WA this time, it was from a law firm. The letter was 3 pages long and filled with the usual legal fluff: cease and desist, unreasonable obstruction, loss of access, and a particularly bold accusation about willfully interfering with a community easement recognized by the Homeowners Association. At the bottom in proud swirling ink was the name of the attorney representing Karen, David Hiddleston. The last name wasn't a coincidence. This was her cousin or nephew or brother. It didn't matter. The whole thing stank of backyard lawyering and hollow threats. I scanned the letter, underlined a few of the more ridiculous statements, and forwarded it to Brian. Within 5 minutes he replied, laughable, don't respond directly, I'll handle it. I wasn't worried legally, but I was furious all over again. Karen was doubling down, not with reason or negotiation, but with intimidation. Classic WA power trip behavior. If you can't win with logic, drown your opponent in paperwork and hope they fold. I wasn't folding. Still, I needed to go on the offensive. Sitting back and reacting was no longer enough. That's when Brian had an idea. He sent me a link to a local news station that had a segment called Your Property, Your Rights. They loved running stories about overreaching HOAs and entitled board members. He told me to send them a brief outline of what happened along with a few photos and documents. I threw together a summary and hit send. I put together a summary that included pictures of the damaged yard, the gate, the letter from Karen Hiddleston's lawyer, and a screenshot of her standing in front of the gate mid-yell like she was calling down the wrath of heaven. I didn't expect a response anytime soon, but I hit send anyway. To my surprise, they called back the very next day. They loved the story. A film crew wanted to come out that weekend and record an interview. They asked if I could walk them through the gate saga, show them the layout of the property, and explain how NWA was trying to strongarm me despite having no jurisdiction. I agreed without hesitation. Saturday arrived with blue skies and a light breeze. The news team pulled up in a white van, smiling, friendly, and loaded with camera gear. The reporter, a sharp woman named John, had that composed, professional calm that comes from years of dealing with WA nonsense. You could tell she'd seen things. We filmed for 2 full hours. I walked them through the original shortcut path, showed them where the tire ruts used to be, and pointed out the boundaries on a large laminated property map. I even played them the footage of Karen's 911 confrontation and her flyer crusade. John asked thoughtful questions and nodded as she listened, piecing together a clear narrative about entitlement, overreach, and legal boundaries. The last shot of the day was me standing next to the locked gate, arms folded with the bright red private property sign clearly visible. I joked, if you need a thumbnail, you should use the shot of Karen waving her arms like she's directing traffic at an airport. The segment aired on Monday evening, and it wasn't just a local blip. It exploded. Apparently people really love stories about an underdog homeowner standing up to an overzealous WA board. The title on the screen read, Residents EO Who Owns the Road. Within hours my phone lit up with texts, friends, neighbors, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive, others just wanted gossip, but the most surprising call came from Karen Hiddleston herself. I didn't answer at first, let it go to voicemail. Her tone was completely different now, quiet, almost apologetic. I saw the segment. I didn't realize it had gotten that serious. I think maybe things escalated more than they should have. I just want to talk if you're willing. I didn't reply right away. I needed time to think. Was this genuine remorse or just damage control after being dragged into the court of public opinion? Later that evening I got another letter, this time from the WA itself. It was short and formal. The board acknowledged that the road in question was not under their control and confirmed they would no longer be pursuing any action regarding my gate. They included a closing statement reminding residents to respect private property and refrain from any form of harassment. Buried in the final paragraph was the real kicker. Miss Karen Hiddleston has voluntarily stepped down from her position on the board effective immediately. I reread that line 3 times. The tyrant of the shortcut had finally been dethroned. It wasn't just a When it was vindication, I had stood my ground. I didn't cave when they leaned on me with fake authority, and I didn't flinch when they tried to bully me with backdoor legal threats. Best of all, I never had to become the angry guy shouting at clouds. I just told the truth, stayed calm, and let Karen's behavior speak for itself. In the days that followed, things returned to normal, or better than normal. Neighbors stopped driving through my yard. Some even waved as they walked by. One older gentleman from the HOA stopped to thank me. She caused problems for years, he said. No one wanted to stand up to her. You did us all a favor. Honestly, we should be buying you lunch. I smiled. I prefer peace and quiet over lunch. He nodded, chuckled, and walked away. A few more weeks passed. The weather turned warm again. I reseeded the parts of the lawn that had been destroyed. The grass began to grow back, slowly erasing the scars left by the so-called shortcut. I even added a motion sensor near the gate, not because I expected trouble, but because I liked the cheerful chime it made when someone walked by. Karen was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she'd left the area entirely, maybe moved in with relatives out of state. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. What mattered was this: her grip on the neighborhood had finally loosened. The board turned quieter, focused on actual issues instead of phantom roads. The shortcut was no longer part of anyone's commute. My land was finally what it was always supposed to be, mine. Not every HOA battle ends like this. Some people lose, some give up, some get buried in court filings and red tape, but I had something many others don't: support, documentation, and the will to push back. And I learned something unexpected through all of it. Sometimes the best way to shut down a Karen isn't to yell louder, it's to let her scream into the void while you build a better fence. Turn on the camera and hit record. Several months passed since the whole neighborhood saga had turned my quiet home into a battleground. The grass was thick and green again, hiding the tire ruts that once carved paths of entitlement across my lawn. The gate still stood firm, untouched, keypad beeping every now and then like a sentry checking in. Things had finally gone quiet. No more trash, no more drama, no more Karen. Her name wasn't even whispered anymore, and the HOA back to their natural habitat. Seasonal newsletters and parking violations. For the first time since I moved in, I truly felt like I owned my land without question. It was surreal, like I'd survived some suburban war zone and emerged with my dignity and property lines intact. Now and then a neighbor would pass and wave. Some were sheepish, ashamed they once took part in the anti-gate mob. Others were sincere, stopping to chat about how peaceful the street had become. One of the board members even dropped off a bottle of wine with an awkward laugh. "You know," he said, "we really underestimated how much damage one person with too much free time can do." I thanked him, took the wine, and left it on the counter unopened. It wasn't about gratitude, it was about finally being left alone. I had almost forgotten how absurd the whole saga had been until one day there was a knock at my door. A sharply dressed man stood there, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as a representative from a local land development firm. I braced for a sales pitch, but instead he offered something I didn't expect. The firm wanted to purchase a narrow strip of land that bordered both my property and the HOA's southern fence, their goal to connect it to a new pedestrian trail system the county was planning. It would eventually link several neighborhoods and parks. They didn't want to pave it or run trucks through it. They wanted to turn it into a landscaped walking path with benches, solar lighting, and a bike lane. I stood there a moment trying to process the irony. The very shortcut that had caused so much chaos might actually become something good, something useful, something legal, and on my terms. I told them I'd consider it and asked for everything in writing. Over the next few weeks I reviewed the proposal with Brian, who seemed more amused than cautious. "I never thought you'd be the one to rebrand the infamous HOA warpath as a scenic route," he said, chuckling. But the more we read, the more it made sense. The county would handle all liability. The development company would install clear fencing to separate my yard from the new trail. There would be no vehicle access, no HOA involvement, and they were offering a decent chunk of change for the small section of land they needed. I negotiated one key clause into the contract: no HOA signage or claim of ownership could ever be posted near my property. I wasn't about to give them even the illusion of control again. The deal was finalized shortly after construction began, quietly, with landscapers and surveyor moving carefully along the old path that once hosted an unauthorized daily traffic jam. Within 2 months it had transformed. The dirt track was replaced by a crushed gravel trail bordered by low shrubs and small solar lights. A wooden bench appeared beneath a large oak tree at the edge of my property, and where my gate stood I added a new sign, simple, painted white, mounted just high enough to catch the eye. It read, "No vehicles beyond this point. Walk if you must, respect if you can." I wasn't trying to be petty, but I wasn't going to forget either. That gate had been more than metal and hinges. It had been a statement, a stand against a culture of entitlement that had taken root in the name of convenience, and now it was a quiet marker of victory. People started using the trail almost immediately. Joggers in the morning, parents pushing strollers in the afternoon, teenagers on bikes with Bluetooth speakers and snack-filled backpacks, but they stayed on the path. No one veered into my yard. No one assumed it was theirs to claim. It was working. One afternoon, while tending to the garden along the side of my house, I overheard a group of teenagers walking by. One of them pointed at the gate and said, "That's the spot from that news thing, right?" The gate lady. His friend laughed. "Dude, that was wild. Imagine trying to sue someone over grass." They shook their heads and kept walking, still laughing. Their amusement made me grin. Karen Hiddleston had become a local legend, but not the kind she wanted to be. She was a cautionary tale, now a reminder of what happens when imagined authority collides with actual boundaries. Weeks turned into months and peace became the new normal. The HOA, perhaps still licking its wounds from the public backlash, never contacted me again. I received one final letter from them, a printed apology likely drafted by some reluctant lawyer. It clarified that the HOA no longer claimed any interest or concern over my property. It was late, hollow, and slightly defensive. Still, I filed it away, not out of spite, just for the record. Occasionally strangers who'd seen the news segment would message me online. Some shared stories of their own battles with overreaching HOAs and stubborn board members. Some just wanted advice, others simply wanted to vent. I always told them the same thing: document everything, stay calm, and never underestimate the power of public exposure. People like Karen thrive in silence. They rely on their targets being too polite, too overwhelmed, or too unsure to fight back. But the moment you make noise, the moment you shine a light, they lose their power. One crisp spring morning, I sat on the bench by the trail, sipping coffee and watching the sun rise over the quiet landscape. Birds chirped in the trees. A few joggers passed by with polite nods, and the gate stood tall behind me like a loyal old friend. There was no drama, no trespassing, no yelling about easements or neighborhood unity, just calm, just space, just mine. The fight had been messy, frustrating, at times completely surreal, but I wouldn't change a thing. I had learned more about boundaries, legal and personal, than I ever expected to. I had seen firsthand how quickly control can become obsession, how rules can be twisted to serve egos, and how powerful it is to simply say no and mean it. In the end, I hadn't just protected my land, I had earned the one thing that mattered most: peace. And every now and then, when I glance at the gate and remember the chaos it once stood against, I can't help but smile. If Karen Hiddleston is watching from wherever she landed next, I hope her new neighbors have really tall fences. It started with a single SUV rolling across my yard like it was a public road, then another, then dozens. What began as confusion turned into a full-blown suburban turf war because my private property had become the shortcut for an entire HOA neighborhood. I fought back with paperwork, a locked gate, and patience. What followed was sabotage, screaming, and a woman named Karen Hiddleston who thought her HOA board seat gave her divine authority. But when she called the cops on me for protecting my own land, I didn't shout, I showed the deed, and I won the lesson. Know your rights, document everything, never underestimate how far entitlement can stretch, but also never underestimate what quiet resolve and truth can do in return. If you're facing HOA drama or neighborhood overreach, don't just vent, stand firm, shine a light, and fight smart. If you found this story insane, inspiring, or both, follow and subscribe to HOA Revenge. We've got real stories, real justice, and more Karen showdowns than your ring cam can handle, because in today's world sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to lock the gate and hit